I used to teach the New Testament in Greek. There is a Christian doctrine that you're judged on your deeds, not just your faith. The thing about Trump that people don't realize is, I don't know whether it's out of faith. I do not know whether it's out of morality. I do not know whether it's a builder's instinct that it's better for everybody to build and get rich than to destroy and get poor. I do know this, that when he looks at a conflict, he talks about it in terms that I've never heard an American president talk about. So I think he will make it into heaven, yes.
Do the left want conservatives dead?
Some at the extreme left do, at least, and I'm not making allegations. I'm just reporting the reactions to the death of Charlie Kirk. When you had people on campuses and in the streets with posters about his death, rejoicing, or you had people at a campus reenacting the way he was shot in front of people. Yes, and people in the social media, that's one point. We'll admit that. The other point is, if you say that this person is a fascist, a Hitlerian, Mussolini, or fascist, and you believe that the reaction, both in the post-war period and today, is rejoicing or relief that Mussolini and Hitler were killed, then by extension, yes. If you call somebody Hitler and you believe it and you want others to believe it, then by logical extension, you want him dead. So do people, when Kamala Harris said that Donald Trump was a fascist, well, if you had a fascist who was going to be president, then obviously there would be people who would take up arms against him as they did against Mussolini and Hitler in different countries. But if you believed in the United States in 1941 that FDR was a fascist and he was aligning with Mussolini and Hitler, there would have been people who would have tried to stop that. So yeah, but I don't know to what extent the next layer it applies to Elizabeth Warren. I don't think those people want people up. I don't think the mainstream old Democratic base, they're very different than the Antifa shock troops, and they're very different than the Squad and those people. But the base of the Democratic Party is a lot of them do.
When you look at the reaction to Charlie Kirk's death, obviously we saw thousands of people celebrating online, but also more recently there's an election going on in Virginia for the governorship and for some other positions, where a Democratic candidate, Jay Jones, his messages were leaked or revealed, and he called for the death of his opponent and the children of his opponent, and he hasn't lost any endorsements from mainstream Democrats. Does that surprise you?
No. If I could propose for you, Stephen, if there was a counterfactual, if a tweet had arisen where it said, I've been thinking, and to a Republican as this one was, if it had said, I've been thinking, I really like what Donald Trump is doing. I can't believe I'm saying that, but Donald Trump has been, then yes, they would have disowned him. But in their hierarchy of sins, this was pretty low. And I say that because you look at Luigi Mangione, they had an opera about him here in San Francisco. He was an assassin. If you look what people said about Crook that almost killed Trump, there were all kinds of jokes that, I'm sorry he missed, and all of this stuff. And so there is what they said about Tesla, Elon Musk, what they did. So there's a lot of people who don't think it's such a bad thing. When they dox ICE people's addresses, they know what that's about, and they're creating a climate of violence. And so I wasn't shocked at all. The other thing is they want to win, and early balloting and mail-in balloting had already begun. And Mr. Jones was 8 points up, and they felt he was a shoo-in. I would think and the polls suggest now that maybe the race is even. It's close, but I don't believe it'll make much difference. I think he will win because of the early balloting. But if they thought he was losing, if he had been polling 8 points behind, then they probably would have disowned him. For them, it's always a rational calculation about power. factor anything out. They feel, I guess what I'm saying is they have a presupposition that they are more moral and superior intellectually than anybody else, and therefore any means necessary are justified to get to that exalted aim or end. And therefore it's just a matter of what do we have to do to create heaven on earth for everybody? And if we have to turn away when somebody threatens to kill his rival or kill children, that's collateral damage, but it's justifiable because he will be in power and he is a superior moral person to the right-wing opposite. That's how they think.
There are some who argue that left-wing violence isn't on the rise. They say that the murder of Charlie Kirk was nothing to do with the far left. It was to do with guns or mental health. And they also point to other supposedly far left attacks, and they make similar arguments. Do you believe that far left violence really is on the rise?
It's just an empirical question. I mean, you just look at Mangione, or you look at the attack on the ICE officers, or you look at the two Jewish young couple that was murdered at the Jewish Museum in Washington, or you look at the attack on Steve Scalise and the Republican leadership by a former Bernie staffer. If you look at the firebombing of Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania's home, if you can go through all of these recent attacks, and there's someone who's in some way connected with the left, if they are political. I mean, there's obviously, emotionally disturbed people who kill without political incentives. But when you look at even the transgender shootings and you see the efforts that the mainstream goes to suppress, say, a manifesto, as we saw in the Tennessee shooting. So there's a sense on the left that their representatives, their hierarchies, their formal pathways to power haven't worked. They don't own the House, the Senate, the presidency, the Supreme Court. The American people, they feel, are stupid and haven't bought into their agenda. They're 60-40, 70-30 on the losing end of these issues. And therefore, they have to create chaos and violence to create a whole climate of unrest. And that can be in the mildest form, the government shutdown, or it can be, shooting ICE people or try to blockade with your cars, or to firebombing Elon Musk. But it's the same general principle. They want America, figuratively or metaphorically, to get into a fetal position, put their hands over their ears and say, make it all go away. I can't take this. I don't know who's at fault, but maybe it all started under Donald Trump. And if he would just leave and the MAGA people would disappear, then the left would be normal again. That's what they want in a nutshell.
But why do you believe left-wing violence is on the rise today?
Well, I just said, I think it's true that there's a lot of reasons, but one, they don't have any pathway to power right now. And two, the American people in that election, now I know it was a close election, 1.6 million votes or something, but in traditional terms, they lost all the swing states. They lost the youth vote in some states. The Hispanic male vote they lost. They had a record high level of black males voting Republican. They were behind on all the issues. So they feel that they're politically impotent. The second thing is they have usually finessed that with control of the institutions. But now they feel that Donald Trump is waging a counter-revolution, and he's 360 degrees in his reach. So when they look at the media, they see that the media ratings, traditional media, network news, PBS, NPR, they're either, if they're government affiliated, they're going to be defunded. If they're network news, they're losing. If they're late night talk shows, they have no audience. So they missed out on the podcast phenomenon. They thought it was like, it'll be just like talk radio, but it's really shocked them that people on the right have a way to use the media in a way, as we saw in the 2024 connection. That's another reason that they're angry. The third reason is, to be frank, there's no deterrence, and they feel that in all these, we're really talking about an urban phenomenon in cities. And even in red states, there are blue city mayors, like in Memphis or Dallas or Houston or Atlanta. So they feel that the prosecutors, the state prosecutors, the district attorneys, and those cities will let them out no matter what. And from what we've seen, they're pretty accurate about that. I think there were 14,000 people arrested in 2020 after the George Floyd 5 months of, and just a fraction of them were indicted, convicted, and incarcerated. I think it was less than 1 or 2%. So in their way of thinking, if we take to the streets, we'll make such chaos, and then we'll bring a new progressive hard left voice to the Democratic Party, which Schumer, Pelosi, Hakeem Jeffrey, they're all dinosaurs. They have no power. We're in the streets. We're making things change. And we're going to create such chaos that the American people will have no choice but to get rid of the right. We're going to blame everything on the right, and that'll make them shell-shocked, exhausted.
How can President Trump and the Republicans create repercussions for these violent people? What should he do to tackle the far left?
Well, I think this is why they're angry. He's the first Republican or conservative that tried to address root causes rather than symptomology. He's saying, why do people poll in favor of socialism under 30? Half the people under 30 go to the universities. Let's look at what they don't. They don't obey the First Amendment. They're intolerant of speakers. They don't abide by the Supreme Court rulings on race. They have racial dorms, racial graduations. They have no intellectual diversity. They're gouging the federal government. They're using race on admission. All of these things he's addressing now and saying, you can do all of that. But if you want federal money, then we're going to make you abide by certain statutes. And that's really Bob. If you can have NPR, you can have 99% of the NPR editorial staff, left-wing Democrats. We don't care. Just don't take money from us. So we're not going to give you $500 million. Go out and raise it from all these foundations if you want. We have no problem with transgendered people, but we just don't want biological males transitioning into female sports. So he's addressing all of these things, culturally, socially, economically, militarily. We love DEI, but we're not going to do it in the military, and all of a sudden we're down 50,000 recruits, and now we have a surplus of recruits. So what he's doing is not only addressing the left in its totality, but it's working. And they feel that he's going after them, and he knows how they work and think, and he's the first president to do that. A Romney, a McCain, the two Bushes, a Bob Dole, all of the recent candidates or presidents that were Republican, their idea was to put a finger in the dike and say the progressive agenda is unstoppable. Look at Europe. We're just a little bit behind, so let's kind of retard it. Let's nibble around the edges, but let's not get into a big fight because, every once in a while we win an election. Every once in a while we get the House and Senate. It's rare, but we do. But he came in and blew that whole paradigm up. And so that's why they hate Trump.
When it comes to the practical law enforcement ability to restrict and go after far-left agitators, for example, Antifa, this organization, there's a lot of calls to declare Antifa as a terrorist organization. What do you make of that, of going after Antifa specifically and this kind of FBI law enforcement ability to tackle the far left?
Well, one of the things I think has been underappreciated is Trump, a victim of lawfare, is saying to the left, you set precedents, and I find them useful because of your precedent. So you went after me with Fannie Willis on RICO statutes, racketeering, and I was found innocent. But you know what? That's a good idea. So if we look at these Antifa people, and they are going on social media, and they are saying, I'm in Portland, I'm in Seattle, but we want everybody to assemble in Chicago at the ICE facility, and that is violent, then they're going to say that this is a racketeering statute across state lines and it's therefore a federal matter. So that's what they're trying to do. The second thing they're doing is they're saying, it's very ironic, but the blue mayors and blue governors are neo-Confederates. They believe in nullification of federal law. This is what caused the Civil War. They are saying to the federal government two things. You do not have a right to enforce federal law within our jurisdictions. And of course, South Carolina found out that was false, and that triggered the Civil War at Fort Sumter. And two, you can't protect federal property. It's basically our property if it's in Chicago or in Portland. So you can't defend your ICE facility, and we're not going to help you. And Article 6 of the Constitution says that the federal government in matters of federal enforcement and federal property is supreme over all local and state jurisdiction. So they're on solid ground, and that's why they can say all they want. Vitzer says things that are just so blatantly unconstitutional. We're going to indict ICE. We're going to, as soon as Trump's out of power, we're going to go after individual. It's not going to happen. It's more likely that the federal government will start indicting people who conspire to obstruct federal law, and they will have a good case for that. Even there was in May a governor of Arizona, Jan Brewer, I don't know if you remember, but it was during the Obama period, and she made the argument that Obama was willfully not enforcing federal immigration law. True. So she said, we are being overrun, and the state of Arizona will now patrol the border. Eric Holder sued and made the argument that she was usurping federal law, and that was upheld. And the judicial system said no state can on its own preempt federal enforcement. And the irony was that he was trying to destroy federal law and the state was trying to enforce it. And still, the court said that in this matter, it was the choice of the federal government how they wanted to enforce their law. So we're in this kind of Orwellian situation now where the left is saying, well, when our guys don't enforce federal law, that's because of the supremacy clause of the Constitution, Article 6. But when you enforce federal law and do what the Constitution tells you, Article 6 doesn't apply anymore. That's so incoherent, but that's what their position is. I don't think the Supreme Court's going to help them out much.
These Democratic governors are arguing that President Trump is going beyond his remit and that there is no crisis or emergency, and sending in the National Guard, is redundant in their states. Somewhere like Portland, do you think there really is a crisis or emergency in Portland? And do you think Portland is the kind of capital of Antifa or the capital of the far left as we've seen in recent years?
Well, if you go outside downtown Portland Portland is a very affluent. Before COVID, it was the go-to place. It was very quiet, no homeless. It was very beautiful. It's got beautiful neighborhoods. They've got sort of an elevated view of the city. Seattle is somewhat similar. So there was not, they didn't have an inordinate crime. But what Trump is saying is that once we decided to enforce federal immigration law, you besieged the ICE facility and blocked people so they couldn't go in and out, and that was a federal property. And Biden didn't do anything about it because they really weren't that active. And then when we came in, you doubled down, and now you basically, you're sort of like the Confederates that are shelling Fort Sumter. Lincoln could have ignored that and just said, you know what, I don't want to get in a war with you. Why would I resupply Fort Sumter? It's South Carolina's jurisdiction. I know it's federal property, but I'm not going to go all through the South. And I think people forget what caused the Civil War. The root causes were slavery, but the powder keg or the trigger was Lincoln's decision to say to the new Confederacy, hold on a minute, we own post offices, we own federal courthouses, we own federal armories inside South Carolina, North Carolina, Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and you don't have a right to blockade them, expropriate. It's the same argument, ironically, that Oregon and Chicago are making. They are saying, we are Mississippi, Alabama, 1861, and you, the federal government, have no right to patrol, enforce, occupy your own property. And you can see where this can lead. Donald Trump could say in California, okay, if you want to do that, I don't want any Californians going to Yosemite. It belongs to the federal government. It doesn't belong to the state of California. 57% of the territory in California belongs to the federal government. But the irony is we thought this was all adjudicated 168 years ago, or 160 years ago with the Civil War. Apparently, and then George Wallace tried it in 1963. He stood in the gate of the University of Alabama and he said, segregation today, tomorrow, these people are not coming into my university. And JFK and Bobby Kennedy said, your National Guard no longer belongs to you. We just nationalize it. And you are disobeying federal law. But this is who they are. They're the new Confederates.
You make a really good point that a lot of these showdowns are specifically around ICE and Trump's campaign to deport huge numbers of illegal migrants. Why do you think the left is so obsessed with protecting these illegal migrants? And can you comment on Joe Rogan's recent comment on his podcast where he was criticizing Trump, saying you should have a heart as he goes after these, what they call undocumented immigrants?
Yeah, I like Joe Rogan, but I don't know what he meant by that, because the reality, and Tom Homan makes this point, and if you look at the Center for Immigration Studies and others that follow this, under Biden, forget about the 20 million illegal aliens are here. And by the way, I'm living in Fresno County and Los Angeles County. So about half of all accidents, the driver leaves the scene of the accident. And we know that that's usually because they're not documented. So forget all of what had been going on before Biden. But it was estimated that 500,000 people who came from Central and South America and Mexico had criminal records, some from Asia. And so Tom Homan said he had a hierarchy. He was going to go after those people, and the second cohort were going to be the people who went through the system, had been adjudicated, and had been ordered to return to their countries, and they never showed up. So what he's doing now is he's got a list, ICE does, and they go to gang places, they go to workplaces, and they go after people with a criminal record or who have already been deported. In that process, there are other people around. So if you're an ICE agent and you go to the local Home Depot 3 miles from where I'm speaking, and you have a M13 gang member out there, and you arrest him, and there's 3 people standing next to him, you have a right to ask for identification. So those are collateral damages, the other 20%. But what is the ICE supposed to do? He's supposed to say, oh, I have you, and I'm enforcing federal immigration law because you've committed a felony or you've been already ordered deported. But the guy next to you is illegal. Now, he doesn't have you're supposed to say, I just gave you amnesty. I just touched your forehead and I'm not going to arrest. He can't do that. He's got to, it's like a highway patrolman who pulls somebody over and the driver is drinking and he looks into the car and there's somebody who's, got a gun or something. He just doesn't overlook it. So that's the 10 or 20%. And then they're angry because he said, if you self-deport, you can apply for legal status in your home country. If you don't self-deport, you can't do that for 10 years if we catch you. So all these people are making, where I live, there's thousands of people who are undocumented, and I've talked to them. And they're making rational decisions about, should I go back to Mexico and apply for legal status, or should I take my chances that Trump will not be, Vance will not be elected, or Rubio, and we'll get another Biden, and I'll have de facto amnesty. So, and the reason that they're angry is they always accuse Tucker Carlson when he said they have the great replacement theory. Now we know, but even when that was said, they said he's racist, he's paranoid, he's conspiracy. But they were writing books with the title, The New Demographic, or The New Democratic Majority, or Demography is Destiny was their motto. So under the Kennedy statute of 1965, when they got rid of meritocracy, skills, capital, English fluency, and it was relative, supremacy. If you had a relative or if you were a member of family member, and they privileged Latin America and Asia over Europe, and they thought they were going to bring in a lot of people under the Great Society, and they were going to be constituents that got entitlements, the Great Society, $20 trillion project, and they would be loyal voters. That has been almost true until Trump came along. And now that you can see what's happened, because when you have 55% of the Hispanic vote voting Trump, now you've got people like Barack Obama yesterday, who in an interview said that basically Hispanics were suffering from false consciousness, just like he said about black males during the Harris campaign. In other words, the left is now saying to these people, you're minorities and you don't have free will and you're not very bright, and you were always our loyal constituents, and now you're back up on your hind legs thinking you can think for yourself. So we don't know what their attitude is going to be, but believe me, if in 2028 the Hispanic vote were to go to a Republican, 55%, they would want to close the border. So what I'm trying to say in a cumbersome fashion, they have no intrinsic opinion on the border. In fact, they're zero populationists. They want the United States to go down to about 100 million people and have big, wide open spaces and rivers flow to the sea and no dams and no factories. So they don't want a lot of people in. In fact, a lot of environmental groups have been against the border. The reason that they are for open borders is just simply, as we talked earlier, is for political power. And they feel that the people coming in will need federal assistance and be loyal to the people who provide it to them.
Sticking on the theme of left-wing violence, do you believe the left or those left-wing violent acts have been successful? So I'm going to give you a few examples. One, the Antifa takeover of areas of Portland a few years ago, the Black Lives Matter riots after George Floyd's death, that led to huge waves of political action from the media, from Democrats, from university institutions, from big businesses. So that seems to maybe have been successful. And the murder of Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk was obviously an incredibly important political operative for the MAGA movement. To remove him as an asset to Trump and to the Republicans may be hugely detrimental to the right. So do you think that these left-wing political attacks have had some success?
They had a lot of success. And I could add to the list that you mentioned, Elon Musk was a strong supporter of Trump and vice versa. But once they started to firebomb Tesla dealerships and individual Tesla owners and sales went off, he surmised that this relationship was going to destroy his businesses, so he pulled away. I know they said he was mad about the bill. And then once he was trying to help on Doge, that Doge just evaporated. And that one of the reasons was that Musk and his people pulled out because he found out that they were targeting his They weren't doing what conservatives did with Bud or Target. They were trying to use violence, and it was more effective. And they know that. And so they were essentially 3 inches away. The hard left, radical assassination left, that young Crooks was I guess a member of. They were about 3 or 4 inches away of blowing Donald Trump's head off. Had they done that, there would be no counter-revolution right now. There would be no Middle East break. There'd be nothing. And they know that. And so that's what's so scary. And when you look at the history of the Secret Service under the Biden people, and how incompetent they were, and how they hated Donald Trump, and how lax they were, not maybe by volition, but just accustomed. Yes, it's been I saw the George Floyd thing, and one day where I worked, we were a conservative right group research, and then all of a sudden I noticed in my box that there was our institution had, as all institutions did, it wasn't really free will apparently, but as part of the university community at Stanford, there was Black Observance Day, there was Native Americans, there was Trans Day, there was Gay Day. The whole agenda came in, and it permeated even our institution because we were on the Stanford campus. So they really changed higher education. I can tell you that when you drop the SAT exam for 4 years and you do not compare the relative merits of a particular high school, just the numbers that you got. So where I went to high school was pretty poor, and I got an A, but that A was much easier to get than somebody in Palo Alto High School. When you get away with all that meritocratic criteria and you let in people, then that's not the end of it. Then all of a sudden you have to have more theme houses and more separate graduations and new courses and more politics and more ideology, and give 80% of your grades have to be A's. And that happened throughout higher education. And that's just one example. And then when you have if you say that black males are incarcerated not because 51% of all murders are committed by a particular demographic, but because of racism, and you start to fund races with prosecutors who will not enforce the law, then it makes a big difference, as we saw in 2021 and 22. We had this huge crime spike. So it does work, and that's why they continue to do it. And that's why the Democratic Party, as you mentioned with the Attorney General's race in Virginia, does not come out and stop it. And I go back to the iconic interview with Kamala Harris in June of 2020 on the Colbert Show. And she said, as soon as she said that, every fact checker, PolitiFact, Snopes got paranoid, and they went in and said she didn't mean what she said. She was talking about, it was right after the D.C. riots when they tried to storm the White House, the iconic church was burned, etc. And she said, this is not going to stop. This is going to go on to the election, nor should it stop. And that made Donald Trump's, what he said on January 6th look tame. And yet everybody said, well, that didn't matter. And then we had Molly Ball right after the election of 2020. She wrote in Time magazine, and she used the word cabal and conspiracy. And she said, we got together and we got big tech, and we got big law, and we got corporate America, and we got Main Street, and we got the Chamber of Commerce, and we changed all the voting laws. And then we dealt with the people on the street, the protests, and we modulated the protests. What she was essentially saying is, we used the George Floyd violence of 2020, and we modulated. We met with those leaders, and we gave them concessions, i.e. the people who were going to run the Biden administration. And for the entire period, almost up to the election of 2020, we could calibrate basically where a demonstration helped us and where it didn't, and they were in control of that. And she used the word cabal and conspiracy. So yeah, they find it conducive, and it does work, and it's sad, but they didn't stop the election of Donald Trump, and that is just a miracle, because they had all the institutions, they had all the money, they had all the media, and they couldn't stop it. So that does say something about the resiliency of the United States.
But it's fascinating to see the reaction after Charlie Kirk's assassination on the right. We've talked a lot about the reaction on the left. The cities weren't burned down, there wasn't these riots, there were mass vigils where people were praying. There's apparently been some increase in membership or attendance of churches across the country. I certainly know people who have rediscovered their faith since Charlie Kirk's assassination. So what do you think that says about the reaction between Charlie Kirk's death and George Floyd's?
Well, first of all, that's been true of all of these demonstrations. There was a famous Tea Party demonstration in 2010 against Obamacare, where there were 500,000 people out, and the left said they were violent. I think Jim Clyburn said they were yelling racial taunts. Al Sharpton. They used the video. They couldn't hear one. And then after the demonstration was over, and you can see what happens when you have pro-abortion or all of these DEI. It's a mess. And what happened afterwards? There were hundreds of people cleaning up all the trash. And so that's been indicative. And the other thing that was a taboo thing to talk about was I can tell you, when I spoke at universities, I could see murals where George Floyd had angel wings, and he had a halo and things like that. And so what I'm saying is they tried to they said that the right was trying to make Charlie Kirk their George Floyd. That was kind of self-condemnatory, because of what they didn't realize is we used George Floyd's death to make revolutionary changes through the use of violence. And you will obviously do what we do, because if we were you and somebody had killed somebody in our ranks like Charlie Kirk, we would have used violence like we do. But so they projected that on to the right. And finally, most controversially, it was kind of very awkward to say that Charlie Kirk, who had never committed a crime, was happily married, 2 children, had created on his own a massive organization, who had eschewed violence and was trying to dialogue with people who didn't agree with him, was the moral equivalent of George Floyd, who was an 8-time felon who had been guilty of a home invasion where he took a weapon and pointed it or stuck it near the abdomen of a pregnant woman, who at the time he was arrested was in the process of A, passing off counterfeit currency, which is a felony, B, resisting police, 3, on fentanyl and assortment of other methamphetamines, fentanyl, 4, who had medical problems. And I won't get into how he died and the mechanics of that. That's all been litigated. But my point is, he was a very different person than Charlie Kirk. And yet they tried to equate them. It wasn't similar at all. Charlie Kirk was just he wasn't a ex-felon like George Floyd, who was not a necessarily inspiring person. He was a violent person. He'd done a lot of harm to people, and he was in the process of doing harm by passing counterfeit bills and trying to resist. All he had to do was get in the police car when they said get in, and none of it would have happened. So the left always tries to take something and project what they would do onto other people.
Do you see a history of left-wing violence in America? I recently read this book about J. Edgar Hoover, and it was talking about the first Red Scare in the 1919, where bombs were going off and he was having to deal with that. And then later on in his career as the FBI director, he was dealing with these black nationalists and communist agitators in the 1930s. Does this go back a while? And has America really seen this long history of left-wing violence?
Yeah, I think the problem that America's had is it's the only country in the world, I think you could make the argument, that had a written Bill of Rights that gives you freedom of expression, due process, and it's enshrined in the Constitution. And 2, from the very beginning, it encouraged people to come to the United States who had criticisms or anger at their home place, and they could come to this place and not just be free and protected, but rich. So deeply ingrained in the American spirit is an entrepreneurialism. It used to be in America, they say the difference between our country and your country is that when somebody with a Cockney accent sees a Rolls Royce, he wants to kick it. When somebody who's poor sees a brand new Mercedes or Jaguar, he says, how did you get that? How did you buy it? How do I get one? So the envy is emulative, not resentful. And so the left knows that. But when you combine the idea that the whole middle class, which they despise, they always talk about these Marxist binaries, but they can never deal with a middle class because of this upward mobility. It goes up and people go down, up. It's very fluid and it's not static. And so every time they've tried to create a class revolution, whether it was Eugene Debs in the 30s or the anarchist in the 1890s who came here, Sacco Vanzetti, all those people failed. So then the left came up with the idea, class doesn't work in America because everybody wants to be rich and successful. And there's actually a lot of fluidity between the classes. And we don't identify classes by necessarily, other than enclaves in Boston or maybe San Francisco, by their accent or their clothes. You can see a billionaire, he's dressed like a slob. But there's one thing you can't change, and we're going to reconstruct race. And we're going to say, if this is under Obama now with diversity, equity, inclusion, affirmative action wasn't good enough because it was only 12% of the population that were victimized, blacks. So we're going to say 30% under our new immigration problems are non-white, and therefore we don't care about the per capita income. We do not care. We're just going to say as a axiom to start with, deductively, if you are non-white, you have been exploited and you are a victim in the binary, and therefore you have grievances against the majority. And so that's what the Democratic Party did. And now you have these absurdities of Donnie in New York saying, we're going to go after affluent white districts for higher taxes. And you want to say, hold on, Mr. Mondami. We have data on all ethnic groups in the United States by per capita income. Number one are Indian Americans. They make about 30% higher than the average white person. But you see, he thinks he is a victim, even though one of his parents is an endowed professor and the other is a multi-million-dollar filmmaker. But because he says he's not white or he's not Christian, he is a victim. Barack Obama is worth probably $100 million. He thinks he's a victim. Miss Presley the other day said, this is Indigenous Day, we shouldn't... She has $1 million plus cottage on Martha's Vineyard, which I guess came from indigenous people's land. So now anybody of any race forever, you turn on The View, any woman who is not white, which is, I guess, half of The View, they're all victims. They're multimillionaires, but they're victims. So that's what the left is trying to do. They're trying to say we failed with the Marxist exegesis because we stupidly tried to use class like it had happened in Europe, that has an aristocracy, a birth aristocracy, and can tell it has a long history of not fostering an upwardly mobile class and immigration.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to use race because we're a much more racial society than Europe, and that's what we're going to do. And we'll see if it works. But so far, Donald Trump figured it out, and he was the first Republican who said, I'm going to appeal to people's economic interests no matter what their race. All the Republicans said when Donald Trump came on the scene, he's a racist, deportation, getting rid of affirmative action. He's going to lose us minorities for the rest of our lives. That's what the Never-Trumpers said. That's what Mitt Romney said. That was what John McCain said. That was what Karl Rove said. They all said he was going to blow up the minority vote, and yet he increased it in a way that they never had, because he said race is incidental to who you are. As far as I'm concerned, I want everybody to be rich. And that was a radical thing to say.
During these debates around Antifa, the anti-fascist left-wing organization, some people online post pictures or have posted pictures of Americans fighting on D-Day, and they said, these are the real Antifa. These are the Antifa people fighting the Nazis. And for Trump to declare Antifa a terrorist organization is an insult to their memory. Are those people fighting on D-Day the OG or the original Antifa?
Well, they never said they were. Other people said they were. They said they were fighting for America against Hitler's Nazism and, by extension, Mussolini's fascism. But that term Antifa came from the left in Europe during World War II for one reason. They, in 1939, on August 23rd, Mr. Molotov went over and made a deal with the foreign minister of Germany, Ribbentrop, and they said that they were partners and they had a lot in common. And Hitler actually praised Stalin. And at that point, the international left said, we are isolationists, we do not want to get in the war. And they were kind of embarrassed about Hitler, but because the Comintern said that now Hitler is a good guy and he's helping us, and the bad guys are the capitalist Western Europeans and the United States. And so they were fine with fascism. They were fine. They were fine when the Soviet Union attacked Finland. And then and they were fine in World War I. World War II broke out. They were fine all during 1940 in America and Europe. And then what happened? Hitler invaded the Soviet Union on June 22nd of 1941, and they flipped on a dime. And all of a sudden they said, this is a war against fascism. And that's where the Antifa sloganeering, you won't find it. You won't find any of the early presidents before June 22nd, 1941. The other thing is they took that Antifa thing and they doubled it after the propaganda of World War II. We forget what it was. If you go back to 1945, 6, 7, 8, 9, the Soviet Union helped the revolution in China, 49, Mao, etc. And their propaganda was this: we were all fighting fascists, and we won the war, and then Britain and the United States kept fighting on the side of the fascists, because after Germany and Italy and Japan were defeated, Britain and the United States and later France, they went in and rehabilitated these fascists, and they turned on their allies, the Chinese and the Russians. And that then really cemented the idea that the anti-fascist movement had its roots in World War II and afterwards. So these people think, well, we're still fighting fascists everywhere, and now we've got the Chinese and the Russians on our side, and these guys in World War II ended up helping the fascists as if they never changed, in Germany or Japan or Italy. If you talk to these people, there was a group at Stanford that said Stanford basically Antifa. That was a long time ago, and there were faculty members involved in it. But the more that people started to scrutinize it, the less they wanted to say Antifa. Then it's a loose group. It was an anti-fascist group. We don't use the letters Antifa. But it depends on the degree of public scrutiny. When the public's not looking at it, then they brag that they're Antifa. Keith Ellison held up a book, as you know, the Antifa, and everybody's got to read this. And then he said the other day, Antifa doesn't exist. So when you start to look at it, they say it's just a state of mind. When you're not looking at it, it's a very successful, revolutionary, formalized cadre.
Shifting gear a little to the Middle East, does Donald Trump deserve the Nobel Peace Prize?
Yes, by their standards, but they gave it to a terrorist, Yasser Arafat. They gave it to a communist mass murderer, Lee Dak-ho. They gave it to, what did Al Gore do? He just said that we were all going to perish in 10 years, and they gave it to him. He did a lot of damage globally by cutting back on, in poor societies, the access to natural gas and things. They gave him one. They gave Barack Obama one, I think 8 months after he was elected, and they said it was because he was fostering good relationships, I guess, between the races or something. It doesn't mean anything anymore. It's like the Pulitzer Prize or a Grammy or an Emmy. I don't know what to say about it. Trump seems to think it's still important. So he did, based on what he's done. And I think the left is Obama couldn't even mention his name. Blinken said that it was a Biden continuum. And everybody here knows why it worked. You use businessmen like Jared Kushner and Witkoff and Trump, and you got rid of the entire UN, State Department cadre that doesn't understand human nature. Trump never demonized anybody. Biden said that the Saudi royal family, they were pariahs. He said that Obama had said he was chicken blank, S-H-I-T. They had said General Sisi in Egypt was a terrible person. Trump came in and said, it's all transactional. I don't care what you say about you. We're all going to make money. So they said, we don't deal in mercantilism. And he said, we're going to have financial interest. You want to come in the United States with favorable access? Then I help you. You're my friend. And then he did things that nobody ever had thought of. Qatar is the traditional double-dealing, treasonous, back and forth. We'll put a base here, but we'll help Iran there. And Trump came. I think we knew that Netanyahu was going to hit Qatar and try to get. So we got outraged by it. And as soon as Netanyahu did that, Qatar came over to the United States and said, you got to help me. Can I be a protectorate of you? And we said, okay, you can be a protectorate of us. We'll protect you. But I think the quid pro quo was you've got to get rid of Hamas on your territory. And I think they will. So it was all transactional. It wasn't ideological. He never insulted anybody. And then, of course, the main sticking point was Hezbollah had 180,000 rockets. Hamas had about 10,000. The Houthis had 20,000. We don't know how much Iran, but they were getting a nuclear bomb, and nobody wanted to deal with that. The Europeans said someday they're going to get a bomb and we can't stop it. It's going to be pointed at us, but we'll have the Iran deal or something. So once that was all eliminated, when we stopped the acquisition of a bomb for a few years, Hezbollah was neutered, Hamas was neutered, the Houthis pretty much neutered. Then things started to happen. And it was whatever Biden and Obama did in the Middle East, if you look at 7 or 8, 9, 10 things, he just did the opposite. It was really uncanny. He just fired the whole people in the UN, basically said, I don't want any UN, I don't want any State Department apparatus in here. I just want people who do business and understand what self-interest is. And we're going to get 51% of the bargain, and we're going to do this. And then he threatened, and he gave carrots and sticks. He said to Netanyahu, you're not going to annex the West Bank, and you've got to at least pull back 50%. You've done enough. And then he told everybody that he did that. And then he told Qatar, you're not going to do this anymore. But it was all based on incentives and what were people's respective self-interest. I don't know if it's going to hold up, but it's made... Trump did more in 10 months than Obama and Biden and prior administrations had done in 30 years.
As you said, we don't know if the peace is going to hold, but the hostages have been returned. It looks like this is the first time there's been a ceasefire proper since the war began in October 7th. So is it histrionic to say, as I think, was it Marco Rubio was praising Trump, the best peace-loving president in 50 years, and Trump says back, why not 100? Is it histrionic to say that, or is it too early to tell?
Well, he got the hostage. That was never going to happen. They were killing hostages or starving them to death. As soon as he got elected, we know now that they were deliberately trying to feed people, clean them up, and they had months to say that they were being well treated. But that in itself is an achievement. The sticking point is Hamas yesterday executed a lot of people publicly. And there are a lot of tribal councils that don't like Hamas. There's maybe half the people in Gaza would rather see an international Arab consortium run the country. So the question is, who's going to bell the Hamas cat? Is it going to be Israel? It doesn't look likely. So Trump is saying to Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, the Gulf states, okay, Hamas is going to come back. We just let 1,700 terrorists out from Israel, and they're going to be the nucleus of the new Hamas. But you people have to come in, and you've got to stop Hamas from re-emerging. And if you don't, then we'll see what he's going to do. But that's everybody's worry, that the Arab world will never stop Hamas because deep down inside, their hatred of Israel and their assumption they can get rid of it is stronger than their desire for peace and prosperity. We'll see. But that's the sticking point. I don't know under the agreements who is responsible for making sure that Hamas does not take over again. It's in the interest of the Palestinian Authority. They were executed when they had an election in 2006 by Hamas people. The Egyptians don't want them in their country. The Gulf people don't want them in their country, but that's not the same thing as they'll have expeditionary forces that will prevent them from hijacking the government again.
Some Democrats have argued that this isn't Trump's success or win. This is actually Joe Biden's success, because Trump has just copied Biden's plan and implemented it a few months later. What do you make of this argument?
What they mean by that is that during the Bush State Department, during the Biden State Department, during the earlier Obama State Department, the policy and planning groups had these certain things that they said. International consortium, da-da-da. And Trump, when he came in, he looked at this and he said, this all sounds great, but this is all for something afterwards. Or if the Biden-Obama-Bush plan said, State Department plan said, you must get the Arab moderates involved to co-own that. What does that mean? Does that mean you call up Jordan and Egypt and say, I want you to do... No, it doesn't. It means you go over to Sisi and you say to him, I'm sorry for what Biden said about you. He cut off military aid. So did Obama. I know you've got unusual problems in Egypt, but you're not the Muslim Brotherhood. You're not Mohammed Morsi, and I'm going to deal with you with respect. And you go over to the Saudis and you say, I'm not going to call you a pariah state. You're, compared to the neighborhood you live in, you're a positive force. And you go over to Turkey and say, Mr. Erdogan, we're really worried about you. But is that the same thing as saying you get the moderate Arabs involved and then you call them pariahs, or you say that to Netanyahu he's chicken blank? So it all sounds well to say that they adopted certain ideas from previous administrations, but the problem was in implementing them. And when you talk to journalists from the Middle East that are candid, or people, I talk to a lot of people from the Middle East, from the Arab world, and they're candid. They will tell you, no matter if they're left or right, the one thing they do not like about American diplomats is they're sanctimonious and self-righteous. And they come into your country from the left and they tell that you have to be like us. Freedom of speech, freedom of this, freedom of this, freedom of this. If we're going to help you in Afghanistan, then you have to have a gender studies program. And you can put George Floyd murals. And we're going to have a pride flag on our embassy website. This is what you have to do. And they look at that as cultural imperialism from the left. And then the second thing about it is, you British, when you tried to get rid of Suti in India, at least you were principled and you did it. And you had the force to do it. I think a famous British general said, well, you have one custom that the widow of a dead man has to get on the pyre, and we have another one. We hang people who do that. And they did. We come in and we try to have this left-wing utopianism in Afghanistan or Iraq or Libya, but then we don't enforce it, and we just leave. And they look at us as arrogant, sanctimonious, preachy, but not strong. Trump comes in and does exactly the opposite. He says to them, I'm not God and you're not the devil. And somewhere between you, where you are and we are, there's reality. And you have a different history and reality and religion than we do. And we're not going to prejudge you. But I'm telling you, if you go beyond a certain standard, we're going to do something. And so he said, if you are going to ally with the Wagner group and they attack us, we're going to destroy it. If Soleimani is going to come here and kill Americans, we're going to kill him. If Baghdadi and ISIS think they're going to take over and kill him, we're going to destroy them all. If you think you're going to get a nuclear weapon and threaten Israel or Europe or one day us, we're going to stop it. And he does it. And so the way that they look at Trump is, well, yes, he's narcissistic, he can be crude, but he's more or less a typical American brash loudmouth. And that's who Americans are. But one thing about Americans that we like, they're pragmatists. And they follow through on what they said, and they have the capability, they're really capable. But that wasn't true of Obama or Biden. They said, you know what, I don't like these sophisticated, suited diplomats come over with all this garble stuff, and we're UN this and EU that, and, all these Paris climate accords we have to involve in all this international criminal court. And then they don't do anything. They're weak. And they don't. So why should we, if you're a Saudi, and I think a Saudi prince would tell you, well, why in the blank should I go out and put my capital and my neck in a guillotine and say to Hamas, we want you to stop killing people, when they called me a pariah? And then when Hamas tries to blow me up, they're not going to do anything to Hamas. Or when Iran sends a missile over here, they're not going to do anything. So I'm going to shut up. But Trump comes along, and he says, what? Netanyahu hit you in gutter? And he calls up Netanyahu and he says, I'm going to humiliate you and make you apologize. So he did. And Gutter got happy. And then Gutter went right into the arms of Trump and said, help us. We don't trust that he really means it. But as long as you guys say that he'll never do this again, it won't hurt tourism and investment. But if he hits us again, we're going to have capital flee to the Emirates or Saudis. So we can't have this. And then Trump says, okay, we'll protect you, and I think he will work on them to cut off relations with Iran and and do something about Hamas. I don't know if it'll be successful, but they like that much better. And that's what sets the left off here in the country. They do not like that at all. They feel that he's a mercantilist or he's not idealistic, and they'd much rather have Obama. And so would the Nobel Prize Committee,
It's funny, my friend went to Mongolia a couple of years ago for meetings with high-level officials there, and he saw this pride parade going on, and he asked what was happening. Why is there a pride parade in Mongolia in the middle of this huge desert? And they told him that this was basically to please the Americans. This was a Potemkin pride parade, a completely fake thing. Just to try and, get favorable trade deals and whatever with the Americans, which is just a bizarre situation. One more question about Trump. So he says that you talked about he's not God and they're not the devil. He was on Air Force One recently talking about not getting into heaven. He doesn't think he's going to get into heaven. Do you think he will get into heaven?
Yeah, I do. I used to teach the New Testament in Greek, and I know the four Gospels especially quite well. And, there is a Christian doctrine that you're judged on your deeds, not just your faith. And the thing about Trump that people don't realize is, I don't know whether it's out of faith. I do not know whether it's out of morality. I do not know whether it's a builder's instinct that it's better for everybody to build and get rich than to destroy and get poor. That's pragmatism. But I do know this, that when he looks at a conflict, he talks about it in terms that I've never heard an American president talk about. So the first thing he said about Ukraine, this is awful. These people are killing each other. They killed 7,000 people this week. This is just a waste. Why are we doing this? We could have a commercial corridor here for rare earth minerals. Why is Putin doing this? He's lost millions and millions of people. This is stupid. It makes no logic. It's terrible. And with the Houthis, why are they doing this? I made a deal with them. We won't kill any of them. I don't want to kill any of them. So when he killed Soleimani, the Iranians called up and said, we got to hit you. And he said, okay, don't kill anybody and get it out of your system. They did the same thing after the nuclear. No American president would have said, when Iran called them up and said, you've humiliated us, you destroyed all of our nuclear facilities, we have to do something, and we're going to hit your base in Qatar, and we want everybody to stay in. It's not going to kill anybody. An American president would have said, no, we're not going to allow that to happen. And Trump said, okay, but if you kill any Americans, you're going to regret it. And then as soon as they did, he said, well, they had to get it out of their system. And then he said, I got to make Iran great again. And so I don't know what the motivation is, but I know the result, that he cares more about death than I've seen any other president. And it's just surreal how concerned he is with Ethiopia and Egypt or Cambodia and Thailand or Azerbaijan and Armenia or Kosovo and Serbia. And he gets involved. And he spends a lot of political capital. He often violates his own tariffs. He does that. And it's everybody says it's his ego. Well, there's a lot of ways that presidents feed their ego without putting their heads into all these far distant conflicts and trying to stop people killing each other. We used to say, if Iran attacks, I think Kissinger said that famous, if Iran is attacked by Iraq, it's too bad they both can't lose. That was the idea, to feed both sides. But he's not that way. And I don't know I think it has a lot to do with his faith. I think his humanity. A lot of people would say, no, Victor, he's just a builder, and he'd rather build a golf course than see it blown up. But whatever it is, it's different. And that's another thing that the left cannot, they can't figure him out. He's that way with people too. They say, well, he's a revenge. The thing about him, he doesn't hold grudges. It's all transaction. He said the other day about Hillary, she praised me and maybe I should start liking Hillary again. And he means it. And they asked him about Schumer. He said, you've said some terrible things about Schumer. He said, well, we used to like each other. I'd like to like him again. So it's all transactional. And that means it's not just business, but there's something about a person that, forgives and can deal with people. A lot of people can't do that. And he can. So I think he will make it into heaven, yes.
I wonder if these assassination attempts have changed his mind as well.
He said they did. He did. He said that what is striking about it is if you look at the two assassins, Mr. Crooks and Tyler Robinson, they're about the same age. But by any margin, Mr. Crooks was a far more successful shooter with a lot more training. He had a little bit longer shot, but not by much. They basically had the same type of weapon, a telescopic rifle. And Mr. Crooks, he did tragically kill somebody and wound him, but he missed Donald Trump's head by 3 or 4 inches. Mr. Robinson apparently was shooting for the neck, maybe because he thought both of them thought that both of the targets were wearing bulletproof vests. But had he just missed just 2 more inches, he would have missed Charlie Kirk's jugular vein, and Charlie Kirk would be alive like Trump is. So the way Trump, I think, looks at it is not that he thinks God wanted Charlie Cook. I think he feels that someone intervened and allowed a killer who was a crack shot to miss him by just a few inches, to shake him up and remind him that he said something. That's what he believed. And because he would say, I think, this person should have killed me, just like this person who was not as adept killed Charlie. But something, because I'm in charge of the United States or something intervened to shock me, and I'm going to respond to that shock. And so he's mentioned that a lot of times. And I think that if you chart his renewed efforts at ceasefires, they tended to accelerate after that. And we'll see. He talks about his mortality a lot more than he ever did. So we'll see. But it's inexplicable how that shooter missed that shot and apparently fired a number of times.
Okay, final question. I want to ask about Barack Obama. You mentioned this interview he did recently on this podcast just a couple of days ago. He was complaining that Donald Trump and the Republicans are using lawfare against Democrats, and he said that we should have an impartial government. We should get back to when, like under Joe Biden, under the Democrats, we didn't have this lawfare. We weren't going after the political prosecutions and so on. The Republicans are weaponizing these things. Your response?
Well, there's 2 things. The law's going to adjudicate it. So Letitia James, it wasn't just one infraction. If they keep looking at her, it's either a grand jury said, who indicted her, that in fact she said that she took a mortgage and property tax consequences for a second home. That second home was not a rental, so she got a break on the mortgage and the tax. And now we learned that there was somebody in that house. It might have been even her niece that was either renting, but it was not a second home. There was another property in which she said it is not a commercial rental. It only has 4 rooms that could be rented. Question then is on Bolton and her and Comey, to what degree would these things have been overlooked had Trump not been in? Well, is it the bigger crime to not overlook them or to overlook them? Because Comey got off easy. He has been indicted for allegedly telling subordinates to leak information that was classified to hurt Donald Trump and therefore to confuse or disrupt a congressional investigation. Or he's not being prosecuted for going to the House Oversight Committee as head of the FBI and on 245 occasions saying, I don't remember, I don't know, I can't comment on that. Willful ignorance. So all of these things. And John Brennan, I don't know whether he'll be indicted, but he himself apologized for lying under oath when he said the CIA under his direction had never spied on Senate staff computers and had never killed anybody collaterally on a predator mission. So there's a lot of exposure there. It's just a question, do you want to bring it up? There's a larger issue then if you're Trump and his associates. Do you say to yourself, even the Deutsche Bank said that I didn't overvalue my assets. I paid them the loan back on time. They made a profit. They'd loan me again, and yet they prosecuted me without a victim. What should I do about that? They'd fine me $500 million with interest. Or Alvin Bragg was told that that was not a crime to have a non-disclosure, and it's surely not a federal crime, and we in the feds do not want to prosecute, and then he invented it as a state crime. It didn't exist. Or Fannie Willis, no need to get there. She lied so many times about her own things. She had her lawyer coordinating with the White House, but there was no racketeering. If I lose an election and I call the register up and I said, darn it, I know there's votes there, can you just go find them? It's not saying I invented it. I'm ordering you. So there was nothing there. So the question then is, they all knew what they were doing. They raided Mar-a-Lago. He had no more exposure or no less than Joe Biden did for 30 years with classified documents. They tried to get him off the ballot. They used 5 civil and criminal courtrooms to. So then the people say, how do you stop this? And the peacemakers, Sermon on the Mount, people say, you don't do anything. And by that restraint, you restore the system to equilibrium. And then the Old Testament and his group say, no, if you don't do anything, they'll do it again and again and again. So you will not invent things like they did, but you will hear of things that they did that were improper, and you will prosecute them, even though you might not have prosecuted those in other people's sense. And so that's what the moral question is. And they have erred on the side of the Old Testament and said, no one is going to go after a presidential candidate and a president in transition and use these agencies, because if they do, they're never going to be free of criminal exposure. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to teach everybody to do that. And we'll see. It depends a lot on the skill of the prosecutor and where the jury is. If these juries are in Washington or New York, I think they're going to nullify whatever evidence is shown. If they're not, who knows? But the one thing is constant throughout this. You cannot trust the left because they inaugurated and created the lawfare, and now they're outraged that it boomeranged upon. It's just a question of whether you select these people or not. And Trump people are saying you got to select them because they're iconic. And it's not just average people. This was the head of the FBI of the United States. This person was the National Security Advisor of the United States. This woman was the Attorney General, the Chief Law Enforcement of the state of New York. If they can get away with it, then anybody can. So we're picking on them, not just because they were perpetrators of lawfare or they did things in their past that were wrong, but because of their position. No one's against, they're just using that phrase, no one's above the law. That's what the left said.
Victor Davis Hanson, thank you so much.
Thank you.